Welcome, dear listener. Tonight, let me take you back nearly 3 centuries to an age of empire, ambition, and peril. The year is 1740. Britain and Spain are at war, their rivalry stretching across oceans, where treasure fleets and distant colonies promise wealth and glory to those bold enough or desperate enough to seize them. Against this backdrop, the HMS Wager sets sail, a ship of war packed with cannons, provisions, and a crew that is as varied as the world they're about to traverse. Officers of noble birth rub shoulders with men pressed into service against their will. Petty criminals and dreamers chasing fortune across unknown seas. All are bound together by the Crown's command, and by the promise that Spanish gold lies somewhere beyond the horizon. If you find this summary helpful, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Novel Whisper Official, and comment below the title of the novel you'd like us to summarize next. We'll make it happen soon. The Wager herself is not among the grandest ships of the Royal Navy. She is a converted merchantman, pressed into service, with timbers that creak under strain. Yet she carries the royal flag, and with it, the authority of empire. As she departs Portsmouth, her decks are alive with the smell of tar and oak, the cries of gulls overhead, and the bracing wind of the Channel filling her patched sails. Families on shore wave farewell, some in tears, knowing the voyage may last years, or end with their loved ones swallowed by the sea. The mission is daring, almost reckless. The squadron, under Commodore George Anson, is to sail halfway around the globe, through the storm-lashed waters of Cape Horn and into the Pacific, to ambush Spain's fabled Manila galleon, a treasure ship so rich it carries fortunes in silver and silk. Success would mean unimaginable glory for Britain and wealth for every man aboard. Failure would mean obscurity, or worse, a nameless grave beneath the waves. For the men pressed into service, the stakes are different. Many had no choice but to serve, dragged from taverns or streets, handed a musket, and sent below decks. Disease already stalks the cramped quarters, lice swarming in hammocks where men sleep shoulder to shoulder. Rats scurry across the planks, bold enough to nibble at the hard biscuits meant for supper. Yet above all, there is a simmering mix of hope and dread. The dream of riches balanced against the ever-present fear of the sea. At the heart of the ship is Captain David Cheap. Stern, proud, and uncompromising, he embodies the rigid discipline of the Navy. His word is law, and he will not hesitate to enforce it with lash or shot. To his officers, Cheap is a man of command, but to the crew, he is a distant figure, feared more than respected. Among the ranks, whispers spread that fortune favors only the highborn, and that the lower decks will pay the true price of this voyage. Still, for now, the ship holds together. The men fall into rhythm. The stamping of feet on deck during drill, the crash of the sea against the bow, the clink of tankards in the rare moments of leisure. The chaplain prays for their safe passage, his voice drowned at times by the wind. Below, in the flicker of lantern light, sailors carve dice from bone, sing bawdy songs, and speak in hushed tones about what they would do with their share of Spanish treasure. The Atlantic crossing tests them early. The ocean seems endless, an expanse of rolling blue that swallows days and weeks. Scurvy begins its cruel work, gums bleeding, teeth loosening, bodies weakening. yet there is no turning back. Letters written home will never be posted, their words lost to the salt air. What keeps them alive is the promise that each day brings them closer to glory. Then comes the first taste of true violence. Off the coast of South America, the squadron encounters storms that dwarf anything the English Channel could prepare them for. Towering waves crash over the decks, sweeping men into the abyss before their comrades can even shout. The sails tear like parchment under the strain, rigging snaps, and masts groan as though they might splinter. In the chaos, discipline falters. Some men freeze, others curse God, but the officers bark commands, driving the crew to whole lines with hands raw and bloody. When dawn breaks after one such storm, the sea is littered with wreckage, floating barrels, and broken spars. The men count themselves lucky to be alive, but the horizon already promises more. They are entering the roaring 40s, those latitudes where the winds never cease, and where Cape Horn, the graveyard of sailors, awaits. On the Wager, fear begins to seep into every crevice of the ship. Men who once dreamed of gold now whisper of ghosts, of ships swallowed whole by waves taller than cathedrals. Captain Sheep stalks the quarterdeck, jaw clenched, eyes fixed on the horizon, as if sheer willpower can drive them through. His officers keep order, but even they cannot hide their unease. The voyage that began with hope and ambition has already become a struggle against nature itself. Ahead lies the Horn, the wildest waters on earth, where fortune and death sail hand in hand. And deep within the hearts of the crew, a question begins to form. Not whether they will find Spanish treasure, but whether they will even survive to see another dawn. The seas grow darker as the Wager drives south, the sky a vast lid of grey and black that never seems to lift. Winds shriek through the rigging like banshees, tearing at sails until they flap in tatters. Rain lashes the men's faces, cold as needles, soaking through wool and canvas until no garment can stay dry. The ship groans under the strain, her timbers flexing, her hull shuddering, as if the ocean itself is trying to crush her flat. The crew has entered the roaring 40s, those infamous latitudes where the wind never rests and the waves rise higher than towers. No prayer can soften these waters, no seamanship tame them. Here, nature does not bargain. It demands submission or death. Men clutch ropes until their palms blister, hauling against forces that feel unstoppable. Each wave rises like a mountain of green glass, curling over the deck before exploding in a thunderous crash that sweeps away anything not bolted down. A cannon tears free of its lashings one night, rumbling across the gun deck like a beast, crushing a sailor before others manage to wrestle it into submission. The cry of the dying man is drowned in the gale, his body heaved overboard without ceremony. Another nameless soul swallowed by the Horn. Sleep becomes impossible. Hammocks sway so violently that men are thrown to the planks. Salt water seeps into every crevice, drenching bedding, clothing, even bread and biscuit, until every meal tastes of brine and mold. Scurvy spreads faster in the damp, swollen gums, bleeding as men try to gnaw on leather straps when rations run low. Teeth fall out, legs swell, joints ache so fiercely that some cannot rise to their feet. The ship staggers forward, but she is battered. Sails shred and must be replaced mid-storm, men climbing the rigging as wind screams loud enough to tear the breath from their throats. Fingers freeze on ropes, and more than once a sailor slips, vanishing into the Black Sea below, his cries cut off in an instant. The others do not even pause to mourn. Survival demands every muscle, every heartbeat. Below decks, tension festers. Officers bark orders in clipped tones, demanding obedience without question. Captain Sheep insists on discipline even as the sea threatens to break them all. To him, survival depends on order. If men falter, the ship is lost. But to the crew, it feels like tyranny in the face of doom. Whispers spread in the gloom that Sheep does not care if the men live, only if his command remains unchallenged. Hunger gnaws as provisions spoil. Flour turns to paste with seawater. Meat rots in barrels split by damp. Rats, once despised, become hunted prey, their flesh boiled into thin stews. Men curse the Navy, curse the Crown, curse the sea itself. Yet still they cling to the faint hope of treasure in the Pacific. That dream, however dim, is all that keeps some hands gripping rope instead of letting go. Day after day, week after week, the horn offers no mercy. The gales shift without warning, smashing the Wager back and forth until it seems she makes no progress at all. Compass needles spin under the pull of the storm, navigation a desperate guess. The men's eyes hollow, their bodies waste to bone, but still they labor under Cheap's unyielding command. And then one night, disaster nearly ends it all. A storm of such fury descends that the sky itself seems torn open. Lightning rips across the heavens, striking the mast and setting it ablaze in a shower of sparks. For a moment, the sea is lit as bright as noon, revealing walls of water towering on every side. The ship pitches, tips, nearly capsizes, as men scream and pray in the same breath. Somehow, miraculously, the Wager rights herself. The mast is saved, the fire quenched by rain, but the men are broken. In their eyes burns a new fear. Not of the Spanish, not of starvation, but of the very ocean they thought they could master. At last, after weeks that feel like years, the ship claws her way past the Horn. The gales ease slightly, the seas no less treacherous, but less furious. Yet the cost has been staggering. Dozens of men are gone, swept away, dead of disease, or buried in the depths without marker. Those who remain are gaunt, haunted, eyes sunken from exhaustion, but they are not safe. The Horn may be behind them, but wreckage still looms ahead. For in their battered state, with supplies dwindling and discipline frayed, the greatest danger may no longer be the sea itself, but the men who sail upon it. The Horn is behind them, but its violence lingers inside the crew like a fever. The Wager limps north, into calmer waters, her sails patched, her rigging spliced, her men hollow-eyed and mutinous in spirit. Hunger gnaws deeper with each passing day. The biscuit barrels are nearly empty, meat gone to rot, water fouled with slime. Men lick condensation from planks, chew leather from belts. Desperation begins to whisper in dark corners of the ship. Discipline, once brittle, now threatens to shatter. Captain Sheep stalks the deck, his face pale with sickness, yet hard with pride. He insists that order will save them, that the Navy's law must hold even at the edge of the world. But the crew, gaunt and starving, no longer look at him with respect, only suspicion. To many, he is not a savior, but a tyrant who drives them toward death. Voices rise in the gloom of the lower decks. Men grumble that cheap hoards what food remains, that the officers dine while sailors starve. Some whisper darker thoughts, that if the officers were gone, the men could fend for themselves, unshackled from discipline. Rumors spread like sparks on dry tinder, each complaint fueling the next. The first open defiance comes quietly. A sailor refuses an order, claiming he is too weak to climb the rigging. Cheap orders the lash, and the man's back is torn open before the eyes of his shipmates. The punishment is meant as warning, but it ignites fury instead. Whispers turn to curses, curses to threats. The men begin to imagine a different chain of command, one of their own making. Sickness stalks them as cruelly as hunger. Scurvy blackens gums, sores fester, fevers burn unchecked. In the foul air below decks, the smell of death is constant. Corpses are hauled up and thrown overboard almost daily. Each splash is followed by silence, a silence that says, more men will follow. Cheap clings to his authority with iron fists. He enforces rationing, punishes theft, drives the men to work, even as their bodies fail. To him, discipline is survival. To the sailors, it is cruelty. The distance between officers and crew grows into a gulf no bridge can cross. Then comes a fateful night. In the darkness, a brawl erupts over scraps of food, a crust of biscuit, a sliver of dried meat. Fists fly, knives flash, blood spills across the deck. Officers rush in to restore order, but the sight of steel in the sailors' hands chills them to the core. For the first time, authority no longer feels absolute. Cheap knows the truth, but will not admit it aloud. Mutiny is no longer an unthinkable crime. It is a possibility, a shadow creeping closer with every hunger pang and every stolen glance. The crew's morale cracks further when the coastline of South America finally emerges on the horizon. Instead of salvation, it brings confusion. The charts are uncertain, the reefs treacherous, the currents wild. The men can smell land, see it, almost touch it, yet cannot reach it without risking wreck. Some curse Cheap for hesitation, others for recklessness. Whichever path he takes, they believe, it will doom them. By now, obedience is only surface deep. Below lies a current of defiance, waiting for its moment. Hunger has taught the men to see themselves not as loyal sailors, but as survivors, and survival has no place for rigid hierarchy. In the dim lantern light, as the ship drifts dangerously near unseen rocks, men whisper plans of what might come if Cheap falls, if officers are stripped of power, if the lower decks take command of their own fate. The Wager sails on, battered by storms of sea and spirit alike. And though the ship still floats, something within has already cracked. Mutiny lives now not in rumors, but in the bones of starving men. Land should have meant reprieve. Instead, it waits like a trap. The squall that comes in from the southwest arrives without warning. A slate curtain swallowing sea and sky, turning every known landmark into rumor. The Wager, leaking short-handed and sluggish from months of punishment, staggers toward a lee that never quite forms. The lead line drops. The call comes thin through the wind. Too late. A roar rises beneath the keel, as if the earth itself speaks. And then the shock. A grinding shudder that throws men to their knees and knocks lanterns dark. Rock bites wood. The hull screams. The next wave heaves the ship sideways and drops her with a crack that runs like lightning through every timber. Water surges in. The pumps clatter to life. Men bend like animals over the breaks. But the sea pours through seams that no oakum can stem. Captain Sheep, face bloodless, orders anchors, orders sails, orders anything that might lever a miracle out of this coastline of claws. The breakers answer. They lift the wager, slam her again, and begin to tear her apart. Night cannot fall because the sky is already a black pit. The deck tilts to impossible angles. Gun carriages split their lashings and rattle like dice across the planks. A mast goes with a howl, rigging snapping like whips, the spar scything through men and rail alike before the sea takes it. Midshipmen boys shout prayers in voices that crack. Veterans spit salt and set their shoulders to the work. Because work is the last fence between terror and madness. Cut the boats free, someone screams, and then the scramble begins. The yawl, the barge, the longboat, everything that floats becomes a fragment of hope. Knives saw through soaked lines, while waves climb the hull like living things. The first boat drops and flips at once, men spilling into iron-cold water. Some surface, some do not. The rest turn their eyes to shore. But shore is no promise. Just a rim of jagged stone and a fringe of black scrub that bends flat under the gale. Torn is a colorless rumor when the wreck stops moving. The hull has wedged on a reef, where each wave breaks her a little more. Orders converge on one plan. Ferrymen ashore between the sets, ride the back of a breaker, leap for rock, and pray. The first crew make it, hands flayed, knees torn, screaming to the next boat to time it now, now, now. A man vanishes in the froth next to them, and then reappears, coughing and blind. He laughs like a madman because his feet touch something that is not moving. By noon, what remains of the wager looks like a carcass picked clean. The rain is a sheet. The wind never stops. They drag survivors above the tide line, lay them in heaps like driftwood, and count. The number staggers them. Too many gone already. Too many still on the wreck. Captain Sheep refuses to leave. He stands on a slanting deck, water past his knees, shouting for casks, biscuit, powder, tools, anything to be passed down before the hull gives its last. The barge noses in and out, each trip a wager with the surf that gives the island its name in their minds. A place where fortune is a joke. When the hull finally breaks, it does so with a sound that silences every voice. A hinge of oak tears free, the stern lifts, the remaining decks fold like a book, and the wager is no longer a ship, but a field of wreckage that drifts away in slow procession. Men on the rocks do not cheer. They watch the last of their world vanish bow by bow into the grey, and then they turn their faces inland to a country that looks like the end of maps. The island is raw, wet, and indifferent. The trees are stunted and twisted by wind. Moss drinks the rain and returns nothing. The ground moves underfoot where peat lies deep, swallowing steps and hopes in equal measure. They gather kelp, mussels, limpets, anything that can be pried loose. Seabirds wheel, laughing in voices that sound like mockery. Someone clubs a bird and weeps when it stops moving. From relief, as much as shame, fire is the next enemy. Flint will not strike in this damp. Powder is a clotted ruin in its horn. Then a miracle, a spark nurtured in a scrap of dry rag, hidden in a tarred pouch. The smallest ember passed from cupped hands to a nest of shredded rope yarn and birch bark, pried from the lee of a stump. The breath they give it is the last softness left in them. When the flame takes, when it becomes more than a glow, men crowd so close their eyebrows singe, their boots steam, and the smell of heat is as intoxicating as wine. That first fire is a citadel. They build windbreaks of driftwood and sailcloth around it, as if defending a fortress. Cheap claims command of the beach, as if the quarterdeck still exists. He sets watches, rations, priorities. Salvage parties comb the rack line and return with triumphs. A cask of nails, a length of rope, a barrel of biscuit wet, but not ruined in the core. A hatchet, 2 muskets that might be coaxed back to life. A co-op with 2 living hens. A cheer goes up at the sight of feathers, because it feels like resistance to despair. The gunner, bulkily, keeps his counsel and counts heads with the eye of a man who can sense numbers sliding the wrong way. They bury the first dead in shallow pits above the beach. The ground is too stubborn, the spade too dull, their muscles too empty for tenderness. Crosses are not cut. Names are said in a monotone that lacks the breath for grief. Those who survive try to eat in shifts so that the meager stew of mussels and rainwater tastes like something more than boiled stone. The chaplain mutters a psalm that the wind steals syllable by syllable. Order, at first, is a scaffolding that holds. The captain's word still carries the weight of habit. Men want the fiction that someone knows what to do. They build huts of poles and sod. They thatch with kelp. They lay bracken for bedding and call it a camp. The boats, hauled above the surge, are inspected like relics. If they can be patched, if a mast can be stepped, if a sail can be sewn from torn canvas and shirts, then the ocean is not a prison, but a corridor. That if is all that keeps eyes from turning feral. But the island is a teacher of cruel lessons. The tide runs like a river, sweeping boats from moorings that seemed safe. Storms arrive from empty horizons and leave with what little they had. The first night, a gale tears half the huts apart. Men crawl into holes and hold one another like brothers who forgot the word for it. In the morning, the fire is out and the embers are sullen stones. It takes 3 hours to find a spark again. They meet others. Far down the shingle, canoes appear, low and narrow, paddled by people wrapped in skins, their hair lashed by rain, their faces unreadable. The strangers watch from just beyond musket range, then slide away, silent as shadows. Later, the castaways find gifts laid where the surf fades, a bundle of dried fish, a sealed rib, a woven basket. In return, they leave iron nails and a length of rope. Trade without language begins, delicate and essential as the fire itself. It teaches the men that the world they have landed in is not empty, only uninterested in their rank. At night, when the wind drops to a moan, the camp speaks in low voices about direction. North, to civilization. West, to nothing. South, to ice. East, to the mountains. The map they share is a braid of guesses, and fears. Cheap proclaims that they will repair a boat and make for a Spanish settlement to seize supplies and repay the enemy in the coin of audacity. Bulkley says little, but others hear him in the dark. If they wait on promises, they die. What they do not say, not yet, is the thought that pulses behind every exchange. The Navy's law may not survive here. Hunger edits rules. Cold erases rank. On this savage shore, a man's value is measured by what he can catch, mend or burn. The first week ends with a count of survivors, a pile of salvaged goods, and a question no one can answer. How long can a camp that pretends to be a ship hold against weather, want, and the gravity that pulls men toward their own private shores? They bang the fire and lie down under kelp-thatched roofs that leak like sieves. Outside, the surf keeps its colossal time. Inside, bones ache, bellies cramp, minds circle the same obsessions: warmth, meat, rescue. The wager is gone, but the wager remains. Every choice will cost something. Every breath will be paid for. And dawn, when it comes, will give them nothing but more coast and the same indifferent sea. The island is no paradise. At first glance, it promises salvation. Firm ground, fresh air, a reprieve from the battering of the Horn. But soon you realize it is a prison of rock and wind. Rain falls so often, it seems the sky has forgotten how to stop. Pools of brackish water collect in every hollow. The men, once bound by the discipline of the Navy, now find themselves bound only by hunger. They build huts from driftwood and sod, roofs of seaweed that never dry, walls that sag under the weight of storms. Smoke curls upward from a single fire, jealously guarded, for they know if it dies, they will have nothing but cold and damp to keep them company. They huddle close to it, bones knocking together, teeth chattering in the endless wind. The island feels like it has no end, a labyrinth of twisted trees, bogs that suck at their boots, and cliffs where the sea smashes itself to spray. At first, they try to keep the routines of a ship. Watches are set, duties assigned. Captain Cheap insists that the men salute, obey, and work as if the Wager still floated proudly behind them. He believes this rigid order will keep them alive. But to the half-starved sailors, his words are whips. They cannot eat discipline. They cannot warm themselves on naval honor. And in their eyes, Cheap is a man protecting rank, not men. Still, hunger has a way of silencing rebellion. For a time. They scour the rocks for mussels and limpets, dive into frigid shallows for seaweed, chase after seals with makeshift clubs. Meals shrink to watery stews with the bitter taste of salt and rot. Every mouthful is chewed slowly, as though stretching it might fool the stomach. When the gulls grow bold enough to land near camp, the men spring with wild eyes, tearing feathers and flesh with their hands. Some laugh as they gnaw raw meat. Others gag. Shame and survival twist together in the rain. The island gives little, and it takes much. Cold bites into flesh, opening sores that will not heal. Scurvy blossoms into blackened gums, loose teeth, open wounds that refuse to close. Men's legs swell grotesquely. They shuffle through mud with limbs that no longer obey. Their bodies weaken and their minds begin to follow. In the shadow of this collapse, another kingdom is born. The men build a crude society on the rocks, a parody of the world they left behind. A few obey Captain Cheap, still convinced that order and the Navy's authority are their only chance at survival. Others, led by the gunner Bulkley, whisper of mutiny, of breaking free from a commander who seems to lead them only to ruin. The lines are drawn, though no one dares speak them openly yet. Cheap insists the wreck must be scoured, that every nail, every rope, every cask be salvaged, for he dreams of repairing the longboat and striking north to capture the Spanish galleon. The men, gaunt and coughing, glance at one another with hollow eyes. North means starvation, endless seas, and blind faith in a captain they no longer trust. The island may be bleak, but at least it does not move beneath their feet. As days pass, the huts become a makeshift village, and Cheap begins to rule it like a governor. He doles out punishments for theft, for disobedience, for insolence. Yet every lash of the rope deepens the resentment. A kingdom of desperation is taking shape, but it is a kingdom split in two. One of discipline and law, the other of hunger and mutiny. The wreck lies offshore, a broken silhouette. Each tide scatters more of it into the grey surf. And with each board that vanishes, the men feel their hopes of escape crumble. They are stranded on a desolate shore, with nothing but the sea and each other. And both are proving merciless. The fire becomes the heart of the camp, a small circle of warmth in a world of rain. Men gather around it with hollow cheeks and trembling hands, their eyes reflecting the flames like animals in a dark forest. They speak of England, of taverns and wives, of the smell of bread ovens back home, though their voices are ragged with hunger. Every day the island strips them further. First their food, then their health, and now, piece by piece, their civility. The rules of the Navy hang over them like a ghost. Captain Cheap insists on ranks, on rations, on discipline. He stands stiff-backed, even as his own body fails him, fever burning his skin and a wounded leg festering beneath torn cloth. To him, authority is the only anchor that can keep the survivors from drifting into chaos. He issues orders with the same clipped finality as he had aboard the Wager. Men are to work, to obey, to endure, but starvation does not respect hierarchy. The daily rations dwindle to scraps, then to crumbs. Men gnaw leather straps and chew on limpets, their mouths bleeding from scurvy. One sailor, crazed with hunger, steals from the stores, and Cheap has him flogged so severely that the others look away in horror. In that moment, the captain loses something vital, not just the men's strength, but their faith. The lash no longer inspires discipline. It inspires hatred. Resentment grows like mold in the damp huts. The gunner, John Bulkley, a grizzled man of lower rank but strong will, begins to gather the discontented. He whispers of survival, of common sense, of building their own vessel and sailing not north to war, as Cheap demands, but west to the safety of Portuguese Brazil. His words are like embers fanned into flame. The men begin to nod. Soon the camp is divided. One group clings to Cheap and the notion of naval honor, though their loyalty frays with every storm. The other grows restless, hungry for escape, convinced that Cheap's stubborn dream of seizing a Spanish galleon is madness. Tension thickens the air, more oppressive than the rain clouds overhead. The breaking point comes when Cheap, wounded and half delirious, lashes out at a sailor in a quarrel. A shot cracks, a man falls, blood spills into the mud, bright against the grey earth. Silence follows, then murmurs, then rage. For the first time, the word mutiny is not whispered, but spoken aloud, sharp as a knife. From that moment, the island is no longer a camp under command. It is a fractured society where every man must choose a side. Loyalty to a captain, clinging to the fading authority of the crown, or allegiance to Bulkley and the promise of life over duty. The law of the sea has been stripped away. What remains is the law of the strongest, the rule of those who can seize food, wield weapons, and rally others to their cause. Hunger continues to grind them down. A few men steal away in the night, trying to live off roots and shellfish in the island's darker corners. Others openly defy orders, daring Cheap to punish them again. The fire sputters, the huts sag, the men grow wilder by the day. Their eyes are no longer those of sailors, but of survivors. Sharp, desperate, and dangerous. And always, beyond the black rocks and screaming surf, lies the sea. It is both enemy and escape, a vast gamble that promises either salvation or oblivion. In the wreckage of their ship and the ruins of their brotherhood, a decision begins to harden. If the Wager cannot save them, they will build something that can. The camp, once a fragile shelter against the winds, now feels like a battlefield. The air hums with mistrust, every glance a challenge, every word a potential spark. Captain Cheap, fevered and limping, clings to his authority with a desperate, brittle pride. He insists that the king's commission remains unbroken, that as long as he breathes, he is the law on this God-forsaken island. But the men see only a commander who would rather chase a ghostly Spanish galleon than face the reality of their hunger. John Bulkley, the gunner, has been watching and waiting. He is not a gentleman by birth, but he is resourceful, practical, and most importantly, he listens. At night, he gathers small knots of men by the fire, lowering his gravel voice as rain pelts the roofs of kelp and wood above them. He speaks of survival, of the madness of chasing war when they can instead seize the wreckage, build a vessel, and row north toward the Portuguese settlements in Brazil. He paints visions of warmth, bread, perhaps even freedom from naval chains. Each word is a match struck in the darkness, and soon the spark catches. The sailors, starved and aching, weigh the two visions. Cheap promises honor and obedience to the Admiralty's orders. Bulkley promises life, food, perhaps even profit. Which oath binds them more strongly? Allegiance to a distant king, or loyalty to their own stomachs and survival? The quarrels become open defiance. Men ignore orders. They sneak food from the stores. They question Cheap to his face. He answers with the lash, the pistol, the full weight of naval law. One night, when a sailor insults him, Cheap draws his pistol and fires. The crack cuts through the storm. The man collapses, blood staining the mud red. The crew stares in horror. A captain sworn to protect them has killed one of their own. It is the moment the unspoken becomes undeniable. Cheap's authority is no longer sacred. His word is not law. His men, gaunt and fevered, begin to weigh whether he is still their captain or their enemy. Bulkley steps into the breach. He does not shout, does not lash. He speaks of a new order, one where the men elect their own leader, one where survival trumps duty to a nation that abandoned them. Slowly, the balance shifts. Men begin to look to the gunner for guidance, not the captain. Cheap, once the embodiment of the king's command, now finds himself isolated in his own camp, guarded more than obeyed. The island reflects their fracture. The huts divide into clusters, one around Cheap, where a shrinking band of loyalists cling to the old ways, and another around Bulkley, where the majority gather, plotting escape. Between them lies a no-man's land of wet sand and jagged driftwood. Men pass through it with lowered eyes, pretending neutrality, though everyone knows neutrality will not last. The rain never stops. Hunger grows sharper, gnawing not just at the belly, but at the mind. Arguments break out over scraps of food, over who owns a strip of seal hide or a few mussel shells. The men are not only starving, they are dissolving, their bodies wasting, their sense of self eroded by misery. Some begin to see shapes in the fog that are not there. Others whisper of eating the dead, and the whispers grow less shocking with each passing day. Then, amid the wreckage of the Wager, they uncover salvation. The shattered bones of the longboat, broken but not beyond repair. Cheap sees it as the vessel of empire, the means by which he will fulfill his orders, sail north, and seize Spain's treasure. Bulkley sees something else, a raft to Brazil, to survival, when Cheap declares that no man may leave the island without his sanction. Bulkley knows the moment has come. He and his allies move openly now, arguing that Cheap has forfeited his right to command when he shot one of his own. The crew divides more sharply still, voices rising, hands drifting toward blades. The air is charged, as though the storms overhead have seeped into their blood. One evening, as the sun bleeds out behind the clouds, the factions confront each other. The loyalists stand stiffly around their wounded captain, muskets in hand. Bulkley's men gather in greater numbers, their eyes lit with desperation. Words are exchanged, then shouts, then the scrape of steel. The fragile kingdom on the rocks fractures into two. The law of the strongest, once only a whisper, now takes form. Each side prepares for the final, fatal choice. Whether to follow the king's command into the unknown seas, or to turn against it in pursuit of life, 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 in pursuit of... From the wreckage of the Wager, the rebels begin their work. The longboat lies cracked and battered on the shore, its ribs jutting like the bones of a carcass. Salt water has swollen the planks, and every nail seems bent beyond use. Yet hunger sharpens ingenuity. With scraps of canvas, tar scraped from barrels, and wood torn from the carcass of the great ship, they begin to stitch together a vessel that might, just might, carry them away. Bulkley, now the de facto leader of the dissenters, stands at the center of it all. He speaks not of the king, or of honor, but of survival, of bread, of wives and children waiting across the sea. His voice carries more warmth than Cheap's cold commands, and that warmth is enough to draw men toward him. One by one, sailors drift from the captain's camp to the gunners. Even men who once swore loyalty to Cheap now weigh their chances differently. Hunger, after all, is the harshest commander. Cheap watches this treachery unfold from his sodden hut, his leg rotting with infection. He insists he is still captain, still the voice of His Majesty's Navy on this God-forsaken island. He speaks of duty, of honor, of capturing the Spanish treasure ship that must be sailing north. But his words echo across the rain and die. To most of the men, Spain's galleon is a fantasy. Brazil, distant though it may be, is a promise of food, warmth, and survival. The longboat takes shape slowly. Its sides are stitched with copper, stripped from the wager, hammered flat, and nailed with salvaged iron. The men work with a kind of fever, their gaunt arms trembling but determined. They caulk seams with tar, weave ropes from strands of hemp, carve oars from the twisted trees that dot the island. Every stroke of a hammer is a defiance, every patch a step away from cheap's authority. When the boat is ready, it is smaller than they dreamed, but sturdier than they feared. The day of decision arrives. The rebels gather at dawn, their packs light, their faces grim. They move toward the patched vessel like pilgrims toward a shrine. Captain Cheap tries to stop them. He brandishes his sword, voice hoarse with rage and sickness, calling them traitors, cowards, oath-breakers. But his words fall on ears deafened by hunger and weeks of suffering. Bulkley steps forward, his hand steady, his voice cold. He declares that Cheap has lost the right to command, that the men owe no loyalty to a captain who has shot his own and would march them north to die. Others nod and shout their agreement. A confrontation looms. For a moment, it seems, blades will be drawn again, that blood will soak the beach. Then, like a tide turning, the decision crystallizes. The majority choose Bulkley. The rebellion becomes mutiny. Men seize the patched-up longboat, push her down the shingle into the froth, and climb aboard. Cheap rages, cursing them as faithless dogs. Some loyalists stay behind with him, unwilling to break their oath, even for survival. But the larger band rows away, their raw hands blistered on oars, their faces gaunt and hollow, but set with grim determination. The sea opens before them, vast and merciless. Their board is no galleon, only a skeleton patched with scraps, its timbers groaning as the swell rises. Yet they push on northward, toward a distant hope of reaching Brazil. Behind them, on the rain-swept island, the captain and his few faithful men vanish into the grey, their tiny fires sputtering against the endless wind. For the mutineers, the gamble has begun. The wager is gone, their captain abandoned, the law of the crown discarded. Ahead lies thousands of miles of uncharted ocean, storms, hunger, and the possibility of salvation. They row not for glory, not for England, but for the right to live one more day. And in their raw hands, every stroke of the oar is a desperate wager against the sea. They row until their hands split. Sol toughens the wounds into hard, stinging rims, and still they pull. When the wind allows, they hoist their rag of canvas and let the patched hull shudder forward, the bow knocking through grey chop like a blunt knife. Cold nights shrink the world to breath and stars. Days stretch into a glare of water and sky with no seam between them. Food becomes arithmetic. A mouthful of dried scrap today means one less tomorrow. They sip brine-thinned water and pretend it is sweet. A man jokes that if they ever see bread again, he will marry it. His laugh cracks in the wind and blows away. Squalls stalk them like predators. The boat climbs black hills of sea and slithers down glassy, bottomless valleys. They bail with helmets and tins and cupped hands. Once the mast threatens to jump its step and tear through the keel, They cling to it like sailors embracing a saint's bones. The sky breaks to white, then grey again, then black, and with every turn of color, the voices in their heads grow louder. Go back. Lie down. Let the sea finish its work. They answer the voices with another stroke of the oar. Men vanish by inches. A cheek hollows, an eye sings, a laugh dies, and then one morning a body will not wake. The sea accepts each in a hush. They murmur a line from a prayer learned as boys, lift, tip, and the water closes, as if nothing has happened. Grief is a luxury the living can no longer afford. They count heads, tighten belts, apportion rations again. Survival is a ledger, kept with bone and salt, and yet the world gives them crumbs. A drift of weed that hides a crab, a sudden skimming flock of birds that means land is somewhere, not here, but near enough for wings to know it. Once a whale surfaces beside them and rolls an eye like a planet, regarding these ragged specks as if puzzled that such creatures keep going. When it slides under, the boat rocks in a gentler swell, and for a minute they feel almost carried. One dawn the water smells different, not clean and metallic, but sweet and green. They lift their heads and breathe like animals catching a scent. By noon the color shifts from iron to jade. By evening they see it, a smudge along the edge of the world, darker than cloud, not moving. Land. No one shouts. They cannot spare the strength. They only keep rowing, though their arms shake and their chests rasp like bellows full of sand. Closer now. A bar of surf, a shoulder of dunes, palms bent by wind, a thread of smoke beyond. Then a chapel bell carries across the water, thin and miraculous. Portugal's empire has set roots here, a colonial outpost, a harbor with boats shaped differently than theirs, sails cut in foreign angles. Voices ride the wind, not English, but human. And that is enough. They try to make a landing and are thrown back, the surf shouldering their boat like a bully. On the second try, they choose a lull between sets and scrape over the bar, with inches to spare. The keel kisses sand, men tumble into the warm shallows and crawl as if gravity has become twice as heavy. On the beach, they lie spread like wreckage and drink the air with open mouths. A boy cries without sound, tears cutting clean tracks through salt on his face. The Portuguese come running, a knot of fishermen with poles and nets and eyes wide at the sight of these skeletons in rags. Hands lift them, chatter blankets them, someone brings a jug. The first sweet mouthful is a benediction and a wound. Their bellies cramp with the shock of plenty. They sip again, slower, and the world brightens by a notch. By nightfall, they are inside a stockade of whitewashed walls and red tiles. Smoke from cook fires climbs into dusk. A bowl is placed in Bulkeley's hands, and he stares at it as if it might disappear. He raises it, pauses, and passes it to the weakest man beside him. The bowl completes a slow orbit, returns half empty, and he finally tastes it. Meat, herbs, salt that is not the ocean. He closes his eyes. For a moment, the noise of the place, hens clucking, a mule stamping, a woman laughing with a baby on her hip, seems a vision of heaven, arranged just this once for shipwrecked souls. The governor receives them with cautious kindness. A letter is drafted at his dictation, stippled with formalities and seals. to inform higher authorities that a band of English castaways has fetched up alive on his shore. He questions them, gently at first, then with the measured curiosity of a man who understands that every story carries weight. How did you come here? Where is your ship? Who commands you? Bulkley answers in a voice trained by weeks of whispering over surf and wind. He speaks of storms, of death, of a captain who lost his way and his temper, of necessity that left no room for obedience. The governor listens, eyes narrowed, not in hostility, but in calculation. Word spreads. Townsfolk arrive to stare at the living men who look like legends. The castaways become a procession of miracles. They are paraded, politely, from chapel to square, praised for endurance, patted, given fruit, given bread, given questions phrased as blessings. They nod, smile, rehearse the same account until it stops feeling like speech and becomes a shell around the strangeness of what truly happened. In that shell, the dark pieces are left out. The pistols crack, the blood and mud, the thefts in the night, the oaths broken with eyes open. Nights lengthen, bodies fill again, slowly, like cisterns after a drought. Cheeks soften, beards are trimmed, clothes are mended or replaced. The men rediscover the geometry of chairs. They rediscover sleep that is not an ambush, but a descent. And with comfort comes danger of another sort. Memory begins to edit. A thing omitted once for ease is omitted again for polish. A story becomes straighter each time it is told, its knots planed down until it will slide through any ear without catching. Bulkley writes. Paper and ink change the air. He frames their passage as providence and prudence, their decisions as the only rational path. He writes of a captain mad with fever and pride, of a company who saved themselves by rejecting folly. He does not lie. He tells himself. He arranges. He clarifies. He selects. The difference is a knife edge. He walks with care, because he knows the Admiralty's gaze is long even from across oceans. A rumor comes with the next coastal schooner. Another band may be out there, somewhere south or east, clinging to rocks and promises. Cheap's name drifts through tavern whispers. Some men stiffen at it. Others look at their bowls. The governor raises an eyebrow. If more survivors arrive with a different tale, what then? In the chapel one humid afternoon, a Portuguese priest presses a crucifix to a sailor's palm and says a prayer in a language the man cannot follow. The sailor nods anyway, not for God, but for the simple fact of a hand holding his. Later he tells Bulkley that forgiveness feels like a warm room. Bulkley says nothing. He has been building a different room, one made of paper, ink, signatures, and the gravity of gratitude. In it the men stand as examples of British resolve, not as fractured souls, from a beach where rules bled out into rain. When the governor finally grants them passage onward, it is with gifts and formal papers that certify their ordeal. The townsfolk cheer, the castaways bow, they board a vessel bound up the coast, and as the anchor comes away, Bulkley watches the white strand dwindle. Relief surges, bright and fierce, then dims under a weight he cannot name. Behind them, they leave graves without markers, and truths without witnesses. Ahead lies London's judgment, which will come dressed as ceremony, but feel like a storm. On the quarterdeck of their new salvation, Bulkley unwraps his pages and reads them again. The sentences look clean. They will travel well. They will meet the eyes of admirals and ministers without flinching. He folds them and ties the packet with string. Around him, the sea glitters a softer green, and the wind smells of land. To the men sleeping along the rail, this is blessed evidence that their bet against the ocean has, for now, paid out. But wagers do not end at landfall. They roll forward, collecting interest in silence. Somewhere beyond that green horizon, a different boat may be clawing towards civilization, carrying a captain with a wound that aches like memory, and a story that cuts the other way. When those stories meet, the sea will rise again. Not with water this time, but with words sharpened to verdicts. Months pass. The survivors who followed Bulkley across the Pacific arrive in Brazil as specters of men. Bones wrapped in skin, eyes hollow but alive. Word spreads like fire through the empire. Against all odds, they had rowed thousands of miles in a patched-up boat, living on birds, fish, and whatever driftwood or rain they could seize. To the Portuguese, their arrival is a marvel. To the British Crown, it is something more. A vindication, proof that their sailors, even stranded on the far side of the world, could endure and prevail. But when these men set foot again on English soil, the triumphal glow begins to fracture. Bulkley has already drafted his account, a testimony that paints him and his followers as steadfast heroes, who mutinied not for greed, but for survival, forced to abandon a tyrant captain who had lost his mind and his moral compass. In his narrative, Cheap is a madman whose cruelty and arrogance led dozens to their deaths. A man unworthy of command. The survivors, gaunt but clothed anew in borrowed finery, are paraded before London society. Crowds press against the docks to see them. Whispers swirl. These are the men who braved the Horn, who lived off the sea, who reached Brazil in a shattered boat. They are celebrated as living testaments to courage and endurance. Pamphlets recount their tale with awe. Londoners drink to their health in taverns. Poets praise their resilience. For a fleeting moment, they are lionized, but just as the city crowns them with laurel, the tide shifts. News arrives that another band of Wager men has reached England. They are even more ragged, more skeletal, their skin stretched tight over bones. These are Captain Cheap's loyalists, and they carry with them a different story. In Cheap's account, the men who rode north are no heroes, but traitors. He claims they broke their oath to king and country, abandoned their rightful commander, and betrayed their sacred duty to capture Spain's treasure. Where Bulkley paints himself as savior, Cheap paints him as mutineer. Where the survivors once saw their endurance as proof of honor, the captain casts it as cowardice. The Admiralty listens. To them, this is no mere quarrel between men on a desolate island. This is a matter of empire, of discipline, of the very order that keeps His Majesty's Navy afloat. If mutiny is excused, if sailors may decide for themselves when obedience ends, then the entire structure of command collapses. But if the captain's word is upheld as absolute, then the men who save themselves must be condemned as criminals, perhaps even hanged. London, with its teeming streets and glittering halls, becomes another kind of storm. Pamphlets are written, some praising the rebels, some damning them. Coffee houses echo with arguments. Who tells the truth? Who is lying? Who is spinning survival into honor? And who is rewriting history to save their own neck? In the heart of the city, the mutineers prepare to face judgment. They know that the penalty for mutiny is death. They know that the Admiralty must make an example. Yet they cling to their narrative, to Bulkeley's written account, to the idea that their suffering proves their righteousness. They survived. They endured. Surely that must mean they were right. But when Cheap's loyalists step forward, thin, broken, yet burning with fury, the hall grows tense. Their voices, cracked but steady, tell a story of betrayal, murder, and cowardice. They describe the captain's wound not as madness, but as a badge of sacrifice. They describe their own loyalty as true service, their suffering as proof of honor. They call the mutineers liars, deserters, criminals. Two stories now stand in the same room, each one polished by hunger, fear, and pride. One makes heroes, the other condemns. The lords of the Admiralty sit in silence, listening, weighing, their faces unreadable masks. The fate of the men who gambled with the sea now depends not on storms or hunger, but on which story England chooses to believe. The summons comes with the cold authority of the Crown itself. The survivors are ordered to London, not as heroes, not as victims, but as defendants. The word hangs in the air like a death sentence. Court-martial. For in the code of the Royal Navy, mutiny is the darkest of crimes, punishable only by the noose. The men who had braved storms that crushed their ship and seas that should have swallowed them whole now face a tribunal in oak-paneled halls where the danger is quieter, but no less lethal. They march through London streets in borrowed uniforms, their gaunt frames hidden under coats, their eyes haunted. Crowds line the riverbanks to see them pass. Some cheering, some jeering, all hungry for spectacle. The shipwrecked sailors, who once lived on mussels and rainwater, are now curiosities for a restless public. Inside the Admiralty's chambers, the contrast is brutal. Here, there is warmth and polish. Waxed floors, candlelight flickering against portraits of admirals who stare down from their frames as if judging the men who had once sailed under the same flag. Lords of the sea sit in solemn silence, wigs powdered, faces grave. The air smells of ink, damp wool, and expectation. Captain Cheap, stiff-legged and scarred, takes the stand. His voice is hoarse, but still carries the rhythm of command. He recounts the voyage through the Horn, the loss of the Wager, the wreck on that barren shore. His words drip with righteousness. He describes himself as a commander abandoned by faithless men, shot at when he tried to uphold the king's commission, betrayed by those who chose survival over duty. He paints Bulkeley not as a leader, but as a mutineer, a man who poisoned the crew with whispers of cowardice. They deserted their posts, Cheap declares, and left me, their lawful captain, to die. Then Bulkeley rises. His frame is bent from hunger, but his voice is clear, honed by months of rehearsing. He unrolls the packet of pages he carried from Brazil, his testimony already written, polished, ready. He speaks not of honor, but of reason. He describes Cheap as a man undone by fever and pride, a tyrant whose cruelty drove good men to desperation. He tells of the pistol shot, of a shipmate felled not by storm or disease, but by his captain's hand. He insists that his choice was not mutiny, but survival, that without his leadership, none of the men who reached Brazil would be alive to tell their tale. The court listens, but its silence is dangerous. These are admirals who govern a vast empire by discipline, who know that ships cross oceans only if men obey. If mutiny can be excused as necessity, then every desperate crew might cast aside its officers, and the empire itself would crumble. Yet how can they condemn men whose very survival has captured the imagination of Britain? Pamphlets praise their courage, poets sing their suffering, and crowds gather to see them as living legends. In the chamber, the two stories clash like waves on rock. Cheap's version, mutiny, betrayal, dishonor. Bulkeley's version, endurance, loyalty to life itself. Both accounts are true, and both are lies. Each man has shaped memory to serve survival, trimming away guilt, sharpening blame, polishing himself into heroism. The Admiralty hesitates. No verdict is rendered, not fully. The law demands punishment, but the people demand celebration. The truth is drowned in competing narratives, and the men, rebels and loyalists alike, are left to live with stories that no longer match what they endured. As the tribunal adjourns, London returns to its noise and glitter. The survivors, once shipwrecked on a savage shore, now find themselves shipwrecked again. This time in the politics, the pamphlets, the theatre of empire. The mutiny on the Wager is no longer theirs alone. It belongs to the nation, to history, to whoever tells the tale loudest and best. The tribunal chamber becomes a stage, and the survivors its unwilling actors. The air is heavy with incense and candle smoke, yet the tension is thicker still. A long table of admirals and lords presides, their robes and wigs immaculate, their expressions unreadable. They know that every decision they make reverberates far beyond these walls, across oceans, and into the very heart of the Empire's authority. Captain Cheap, gaunt but unbowed, seethes with a conviction that borders on madness. He insists that the code of the Navy is sacred, that without obedience to command, ships will founder, squadrons will collapse, and Britain will be left vulnerable to her enemies. His testimony is a litany of betrayal. Men who shirked their duty, men who defied orders, men who dared to raise arms against their rightful captain. He paints himself as a martyr of honor, a man who would rather starve on that barren rock than abandon his sovereign's cause. Each word is sharpened with bitterness, and every glance at Bulkeley carries a silent accusation. Then the gunner speaks. Bulkeley has no polish, no aristocratic bearing, but he has something more compelling, the sympathy of a public that has read his account and seen him as a man of the people. He does not thunder, he reasons. He lays out the days of torment in chilling detail, the weeping wounds, the rotting food, the endless nights of rain and hunger. He speaks of the man who fell under Cheap's pistol, of the fear that the captain would rather see them all dead than admit defeat. He claims the men were not mutineers, but survivors, united in a desperate, righteous choice to live. The stories diverge, then circle each other like dueling ships. One tale says the castaways were cowards. The other says they were heroes. Both cannot be true, yet both carry pieces of truth. Memory is a weapon here, each version wielded like a cutlass in the candlelit hall. The Admiralty peers down from their high seats, not at dying men now, but at symbols. Cheap embodies authority, hierarchy, the chain of command that holds the empire together. Bulkley embodies dissent, the dangerous notion that ordinary men may reject orders if they believe their lives are thrown away. The lords whisper among themselves, glancing at the faces of the ragged sailors who sit as if already condemned. Outside, London waits. Crowds throng the wharves, taverns, and pamphlet stalls, trading in rumors as feverishly as they once traded in sugar and rum. The story of the wager has become a public obsession, a mirror for the empire itself. Which version will England believe? The tale of honor betrayed, or of survival against impossible odds? For the men who rode to Brazil, every word spoken in that hall is a wager more perilous than any storm. The news hangs unseen, waiting on the choice of which story the empire will anoint as truth. Survival, they realize, was only the beginning. Now they must survive the judgment of history. The chamber falls silent, but the silence is heavier than any storm the wager endured. What began as a voyage for glory has ended in a courtroom where the true treasure is not gold, but reputation, honor, and the shaping of memory itself. The men who survived the wreck stand divided, each faction clutching its own story as if it were a weapon, each desperate to carve its place in the official record. Captain Cheap, limping and scarred, insists his authority was absolute. To him, mutiny is not merely a crime against one man, but an assault on the very backbone of empire. If the Admiralty forgives these sailors, he argues, every mast in His Majesty's Navy will tremble. Ships cannot be ruled by consensus. They must be ruled by command, even on the farthest shore, even in the jaws of death. His voice cracks, but does not falter. He has lost his ship, his men, his health. He will not lose his honor. Across the room, Bulkley and his followers clutch their written testimony. Their words, copied and passed from hand to hand across the Atlantic, have already taken root in the public imagination. They speak of a different truth. That survival required defiance, that the captain's madness threatened them more than the storms, that their choice to turn north toward Brazil was not betrayal, but the only sane path. They tell of building the makeshift vessel, of rowing through impossible seas, of crawling ashore, half dead, yet alive. They are proof, they insist, that loyalty to life itself is the highest duty. The Admiralty listens, but not as men listening for truth. They listen as guardians of power, weighing not what happened on that God-forsaken island, but what England must believe happened. If Cheap is disgraced, it stains the Navy's authority. If Bulkley is condemned, the Crown risks turning heroes into martyrs in the eyes of the people. The lords know the empire sails on obedience, and obedience is fragile. Pamphlets fly across London like startled birds, each retelling the story in a new shape. Some paint Cheap as a tragic figure, undone by mutiny. Others exalt the castaways as models of British endurance. The public, starved for tales of glory and scandal, devours every word. In taverns, men argue over whether the captain was a tyrant or a martyr, whether the rebels were villains or saviors. Truth splinters into factions, just as it had on that desolate island. And so the final gamble emerges, greater than storms or starvation. It is the wager of memory itself. Which story will survive? Whose version will become history, and whose will be forgotten? Cheap and Bulkley have both rewritten their past to save their lives, to carve themselves as heroes rather than villains. The men who suffered with them have chosen sides, each voice shaping the tale in a new direction. The truth, like the ocean, shifts with the wind. It drowns some voices, carries others across vast distances, and leaves future generations to mistake wreckage for the whole ship. And as the echoes of the trial fade into the corridors of power, one thing becomes clear. Empires rise not only on cannons and sails, but on stories. Stories fought over as fiercely as any treasure. The wager lies in pieces on that distant shore, rotting into the sea. But its shadow lingers, long and dark, over Britain, over history, over us. And as you listen, you too become part of the wager, part of the choice between competing truths, part of the restless sea of memory that will decide which version of survival endures. Survival endures. Survival endures. Survival endures. Survival endures.